the budget, and then we.
I think by looking around the rooms, I think everyone has their book. I do apologize. I should have notified y'all last week. Thursday I had them all completed and finished and on your desk. I wasn't really sure everyone was going to come in, but I should have at least let you know so you could have took them home over the weekend. I think a few of you may have, but I'll definitely keep that in mind next year. I do obviously appreciate the opportunity to review this budget that was submitted from the administration. I think the Cherokee Nation continues to grow and go in a direction that is very positive, not just on the federal side, but also on the tribal side. We're continuing to see good, solid growth. Year to year, we did hit an obvious lull in some of our proprietary operations this year, but things are turning around. So the tribal side of our funding is continuing to go in the direction we want to go. I'll go into specific points of interest about some of the federal and tribal dollars a little bit later, but as a synopsis of the review, again, I looked at the individual budget, the line items within them, the staffing requests, and the financial reports from budget versus actuals out of the Lawson financial system for the past several years. And you'll notice when we go through this review that I will have several years worth of comparative data. And that brings to my first point, major point of interest that I'll bring forth is that we're still feeling the effect of the W.W. Hastings assumption to the tune of around $70 million. That particular funding source is slightly over 50% compact and almost 50% third-party revenue generated. And that is having a direct impact on all comparative charts and tables in the health group as well as the entire nation. This is such a substantial increase in the budget. We're going to see the impact of it even when we look at nationwide charts. Another point of interest, as I reported last year doing this review, the proposed budget has a significant number of unfilled full-time employee or positions. The budget contains funding for salaries and related fringe costs for 2,707 existing positions that were existing when the budget was compiled in May, at a cost of slightly over $135 million. So that in there lies the actual salary impact that the Cherokee Nation's having, the government is having on the communities when it comes to the salary, just the salary impact of the economics. Those 2,707 include all the tribal employees at Hastings Hospital, and in addition, this budget contains, as Callie mentioned, over 400 vacant positions. That number of vacant positions, again, these were vacant back when the budget was compiled. No way of knowing how many of those have been filled to this date, but we can look at trend data and get a pretty good feel. That number is up 156 from last year. Last year there was 256 vacant positions. Now we're over 400 vacant positions. And that is at a cost of an additional $19 million. Now that's across all funding sources. So again, I'm talking nationwide right now. The budget's also reflecting additional 114 new positions at a cost of $5 million. These are salary and fringe costs, not just straight salaries, but also the related burden with the fringes. That 3,233 full-time equivalents for FY 2010 is estimated at over $160 million. The only reason I point that out, some of these numbers, is because of the significant number of unfilled positions, the vacants and the news. Because again, it's unclear how this budget could even contemplate the physical space requirements for 500 people, with the vast majority of those people being here locally. I'm not really sure where we would even put that many people. The Tribal General Fund, which is largely comprised of dividend income, continues to carry a significant amount of unexpended carryover into future periods. Not necessarily a bad thing. If we analyze the budgets funded by the tribally funded source and remove any effects of non-operational accounts like transfers, reserves, and capital expenditures, we should be left with a fairly good representation of operational budgets. And as indicated on the attachment to my memo in your books, which would be basically page 2, you can see where we have spent and compared it to the budget numbers. The underutilization is spread over a majority of all of our groups. So this isn't an isolated pattern or trend. This is typical throughout the Cherokee Nation. In fiscal year 07, 17 million or 28% of the budget was remaining at the end of the year. Some of that was capital expenditures that didn't get constructed within that fiscal period. In 2008, nearly 18 million of that annual budget. Again, I took out reserves and transfers to try to get to an operation. Actually, correct my own statement, these numbers do not reflect capital expenditures. These are just operating numbers. 18 million or more than a fourth of all the operating budgets in 08 was unspent. And if we look at the current year, we're projecting well over 20 million in 09. Although the balances do not compound or accumulate each year. This is a very important point. Each year we look at what goes unspent at the end of the year is not just current year revenues, it's prior year surplus dollars as well. Okay? That's a very important point to remember, because we're not generating 18 to 20 million dollars of surplus or windfall revenues that goes unspent each year. That is a combination of that year's surplus plus prior year carryovers coming into that budget again. Just like we did here recently, about 4 months ago, when we brought forth the actual carryover on the Gen Fund in our mod package. Callie pointed out earlier that in 2009, the financial system is reflecting an excess of expenses over revenue for this year for the first time. You notice that her chart had every year had surpluses of revenue in excess of expenses. And then through July of 2009, that number is 7 million to the negative, or expenses in excess of revenues. Now, what wasn't pointed out, though, was that 3 million of that 7 was capital expenditures. Okay, where the revenues was derived in the prior years, but the expenses were we just got to expending those dollars. And what is contributing to that $7 million this year is a $2 to $3 million shortfall in the dividend. The next thing I point out in my memo, I guess is an obvious thing. I just want to stress one point. You guys have already talked about this. The budget that went over to the Treasurer's office, submitted by the Speaker, contained the community assistance, and that was not loaded into the budget, as you're all aware. But I want to make sure everyone understands that there's $220,000 of contract services that wasn't loaded into the budget on top of that. It doesn't have anything to do with community assistance. Councilor Jordan.
I think this is probably a Todd question. Todd?
Yes.
I think the statement that was just made is we sent over a budget and it's had several items taken out of it by the Chief's office. What is your thought on that being done regarding separation of powers?
The Chief has a constitutional right to propose a budget, just like the President of the United States does. All right? But in what that budget is a suggestion. Now, Congress, in developing their budget for their staff, they will work with the United States President in developing a budget, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it is the President or the Chief, in this instance, that will submit a budget and say, this is my proposed budget. This is my suggestion for FY 2010. Now, the ultimate power as to what budget passes is within you. You guys can put in, take out, etc. So, the Chief could have sent over a budget that zeroed out your entire funding. But you have, which is just his suggestion. You have the power you, and only you, have the power to pass the budget. And he could either veto it or sign it.
And one of the items that was taken out, I understand, was attorney fees. So if there comes a time where we disagree on the separation of powers, we will no longer have fees to acquire attorneys to submit that question to the court. Is that correct? If these fees don't go back in?
But
I think I still have the form.
Point of information, you said?
I think that'd be appropriate. It's really been reduced to 100,000. It's still there, just not the amount that we originally proposed.
okay. Well,
To clarify.
point of information would supersede, would be, but now to answer your question, no, it's a self-evident, answer. I mean, if you don't have the attorney fees, and I don't know exactly what is in the attorney fees, but I would suggest that you make sure that you have, ample resources for the council in all aspects to do your job.
And just one more question, just to make sure I understand. If we have a pending lawsuit right now that's going to transcend over into the new fiscal year, if we have no attorney fees in there, and that was what was paying for the lawsuit to progress through the court system, then what are we to do on those pending lawsuits?
Well, there's no money. They don't progress. It's my understanding that what was reduced or cut was the individual attorney funds, which would not. Okay, he can clarify that.
Yeah, let me jump in real quick. Just here's what it was. The contract service budget. Okay, we have two contract service line items. One is a legal service, okay, which goes to the attorney for the council. Okay, the other line is a contract service, which contains three components. At least that was what was contemplated in the line item. $170,000, $10,000 per counselor for legal consultation, individual legal consultation. Okay, $75,000 for what may be needed for water rights or any of, and $75,000 for any accounting or auditing, special project work that the council. These have been in the budget for years. Sometimes they've been used. Sometimes they don't. They're not used. So the 75 is 150, and then the 170, okay, is the 320.
So how much is that line item?
That 320 was reduced to 100.
So what are you saying?
I don't even know what the 100's for.
Okay. That would be for this group maybe to make a decision on?
Well, that was what the chief proposed, that this line item be taken down to 100. So I don't know, I know what made up what went over. Chief proposed 320 reduced to 1. I guess it's up to y'all to decide what the one's for, or is one enough?
Maybe Kelly could give us some information on it, because I'm real concerned about that, because I feel like that may be a violation of separation of powers, because the pending lawsuit is against the chief. And if you take away our attorney fees so that we can't participate in that lawsuit, well, you win by default. That's a neat little way to do. If you control the attorney fees of both sides, that's a neat little way to win your lawsuit.
Ms. Cage.
As Doug pointed out, this is an item that was in the council's budget of $320,000 for contract services. That line item has gone roughly unused the last several years, so the chief reduced it in his proposed budget by $220,000. As Todd mentioned, this is the chief's proposed budget. The council, during the next day and 2.5 days, will be reviewing all this and I'm sure making proposed changes. This is not necessarily just legal services. I think Doug mentioned that this line item in the past has been used for things like accounting services and those types of things. It's not in the budget as, quote, legal services. It shows up as contract services, and it's been mainly unused for the last several years.
My only comment to that is I'm seeing in this budget that roughly $26 million appears to be unused over the last couple of years, but we don't see those departments getting 66% of their budget in a particular area cut.
There are a lot of budgets, if I could respond to that. If you look at the 2010 budget versus the 2009 budget, there are a lot of budgets that have been reduced. We went through approximately 5 weeks of working on this to get our budget in line with the revenue projections. We cut approximately $11 million out of the executive branch gen fund budgets when we first started this process for 2010 versus 2009.
And I do want to remind everyone, we do have a budget mod every single month where we can adjust numbers as necessary.
Well, possibly we need to think about then if there's $26 million left over, that we cut that much from every budget that has leftover money. So whatever we have left, y'all take it, but we want to cut everybody else's budget. It's a possibility for this body to think about that. All these groups that have carryover, Chief has $2,381,000 anticipated carryover for this fiscal year. It's half his budget. Let's cut him 50%. If we're going to be cut, then everyone should be cut. That's just for you all to think about.
Continue that.
Moving off that. To wrap up, I do want to make a few comments that, again, it's been a privilege to review. I hope this review, as we go through, gives all of you and some assistance in a greater understanding of the appropriation process. I've been integrally involved in that appropriation process for over a decade now here with the nation, and I always consider it a privilege to be able to go into this level of review to provide this type of information to the governing body where it will assist you in your decision making. The Treasurer's Office, as I mentioned in my memo, I want to express an appreciation to them. They've been very cooperative with me over the last month with a lot of questions, a lot of inquiries, and a lot of reports. They have consistently improved their budgeting techniques and procedures. And although several aspects of this budget will be isolated over the next day or so and further expanded upon, I can see ongoing efforts for continual process improvements in this appropriation process and in this comprehensive budget. So with that, the attachment to my memo, which is right behind in your book, page 2, that particular sheet, I just want to make a couple of comments because there's some information that's already been thrown out about these numbers. And I want to clarify. What we're looking at on this landscape report is a 4-year history. It has 07, 08, and 09. The data on this report is just the tribal funding source. It's just what we used to call gen fund, okay? It excludes, I intentionally excluded the effect of any transfers between funds, okay, because that doesn't cut a check out to the third party. I removed any reserves where funds have been intentionally set aside, and also removed any capital expenditures for construction projects that typically run beyond 1 year, and they're special funded. They're either funded specifically out of carryover or specifically out of an indebtedness instrument, whether it's a bond or a note. I took all those out to try to reflect as closely as possible operational budgets. Now in 07, you can see that there was $60.9 million of budget, 43.7, 17. There's the 17 million mentioned in the memo. And I wanted, as you can see, it's spread out across all the groups. 2008, that number was very consistent, 17 million again. Now again, 17 million in '08 that's remaining is not on top of the 17 million in '07. Because that carryover in '07 came into the appropriation process, we just had 17 million left at the end of that year that still didn't that still went unspent. Moving into '09 brings us to the 26 million that we discussed. The 26 million, keep in mind, is a projected remaining number based off of actuals through July 29th, projected out through the end of September. I have no way of knowing what type of expenditure levels are going to occur in the last 60 days of the fiscal year. But I will qualify my statement with this. I have plenty of history here to know the last 2 months of the fiscal year has about 30 to 35% of the total expenditure for that year in it. I've watched that consistently over a long time because people become aware that they have a considerable amount of budget left, and they have a concept of, well, I better use it or lose it. They don't guarantee their carryover on Gen Fund. Nobody gets their carryover guaranteed to them, as a lapsing process of that tribal discretionary nature. The 2010 budget reflects 59 million in it. Now, the 59 million that's in this budget for 2010 does have a component of carryover in it. I think it's extremely light. I think we're going to have, as I mentioned to you last year, I predicted around 10 million of carryover that was going to be brought forward. 9 million was brought forward 6 months later. I think this is probably in that same area, but I think it's going to be more around 7 that we're going to see coming forward next year, unless there's some major expenditures happening that would go beyond our normalcy here at the next. Where people normally ramp up spending in August and September, we would have to go way beyond what we normally do to see these numbers not hold. Simply because I know what's rolling into 2009. I know where our budget is in 2009, and I know where we're spending on. The revenue side, the only reason it's going to be lower than what we're going to bring forward or what we brought forward last year, or like 6 months ago, is because the revenues have slightly dipped this 2010, the estimates. I go with Callie's estimates. If she estimates tax, license, gaming, you name it, if she estimates those revenues, unless I see something that I don't understand and I get clarification from her, I go with those estimates. That's what I used. So, as far as doing analytical reviews, okay. So do I think that the carryover, we're going to have a considerable amount of carryover at mid-year in 2010? Absolutely. I would be extremely shocked if we reconcile the book, close the audit, and 7 million carryover is all there is, and we've already got it on the books. If that's the case, we will be going into appropriation lockdown mode. I don't believe that's going to be the case. But with that, I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarification on these revenues as we look at them in projected carryover. Yes, we have a trend of underutilizing discretionary budgets. I've tried to isolate these in this review where those areas are that don't pertain to reserves or capital expenditures. Because we never want to remove any carryover pertaining to a capital expenditure project that's 30% underway, obviously.
Councilor Sutton.
Yeah, Doug, you said that if we only expected to carry over 7 million, that we would go into appropriations lockdown mode. Can you explain that? And
Sure. Yeah.
You've got, like I said, a lot of history. I just want to understand what that means for the nation.
Okay. What that means is there would be no more discretionary budgets appropriated, okay, out of this body for specific purposes. In other words, all the available anticipated revenues for the year is already appropriated for specific purposes. Okay, so we cannot appropriate any additional programs or subsidies to existing programs. In addition, we have to closely monitor the revenues that are estimated in that budget, and if we see projected shortfalls in any area, we've got to immediately cut budgets. Because we understand it's against the law to have deficit spending, right?
Under the Cherokee Constitution.
That's what I mean when I say lockdown. Means we got to really focus. We got to stop appropriating money. We have to really watch where are we in the recognition of revenue. We know where we are on the budget appropriations. We know what we've appropriated the uses for. We got to make sure the money comes in the door that we've appropriated to go out.
You mentioned that you were within $1 million of the, in your forecast for carryover. Is that pretty typical, plus or minus, or how often have we missed it? I guess.
Well, I don't project carryover.
I thought you just said that you projected we would
I
bring
projected
over
a estimated carryover in addition to what was in the 29 back a year ago in the budget hearings. And I said it would be in the range of 9 to 10 million.
So the estimated carryover, how much are we plus or minus there typically?
Typically, we bring forward anywhere from at mid-year.
Estimates, because we're talking about estimates right now, so.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Wait, let me answer your question.
Oh,
Hold on.
okay.
Hold on. I mean, you addressed it.
Right.
Specifically, are you asking?
I mean, are we off 2 million sometimes, or 3 million? Are we always just put back to?
We're always
10%?
bringing. No, we're always bringing. I say always. For the last several years,
Right.
we have brought forward carryover in excess of what was already in the budget because we have closed the books of multi-million-dollar amounts, anywhere from 4 to 9.5.
Okay.
It all varies throughout the. I mean, each year differs.
Right. But that's the range.
It's very conservative what the treasurer's office is doing in the budget, and I totally agree with what she's doing.
I understand that.
And that's what I was wanting to explain. When I do my carryover estimate for the initial budget, that's based on specific items that I know are either long-term, like capital, or some of our reserves. I don't try to go through each individual accounting unit and say, well, I don't think they're going to spend their budget, and I don't think they are,
Right.
because that money is appropriated, and I feel like if I did that, I'd be taking a real gamble.
Do you agree with 4 to 9 million typically?
Yeah, in the past it has been,
Okay.
and we have exceeded our estimates on revenue, or come in really close on
Right.
revenue. The factors that are at play for '09 and '10 are revenue shortfalls, and we've gotten better at
Right.
spending our budgets.
Right. Staying within, I mean, that's the target, you hit the target.
Right, right. So that's why when I do a comprehensive budget estimate, I don't try to overstate the carryover, because we would be in a budget cutting mode if we went the opposite
Right,
direction.
right.
And like Doug said, it's a conservative approach, but it has worked well for us, and
Absolutely.
we don't have to get into a panic mode of, hey, we've got to cut gen fund budgets.
Right. Right. Thank you.
And one other thing, just to add to what Callie just said, I want to make sure everyone understands, I'm not being critical of the process. I agree with what she's doing.
Absolutely.
But facing reality is that the reality is every year we have anywhere from 4 to 9 million of carryover, not even that we get to put back on the table once we know what the final number is. And that was the point I was making. Any other?
You did a more detailed report.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Last year, there were some specific reports that was requested, and I thought I put these in your book, and I did put them in your book, but I had a couple of fields. I put percentages instead of remaining dollars, and after I looked at the books, I decided the percentage expended just doesn't really tell you as much as how much of the budget went unspent. So you'll notice these reports in your book, but this is one that was, last budget hearing I did the same thing. Thank you. As well as identifying any budgets that are funded out of carryover, either in part or in whole. The yellow highlighted budgets, and by the way, this report is every single budget at the Cherokee Nation, okay? Irregardless of the funding source, but it tells you what group it's in, what department under that group, and then it gives you the accounting unit and the description. And also, it gives you the same 2010 budget, the 2009 current year budget compared to the projected actuals. And again, these projection numbers are projected based on July 29th's actuals projected out to the end of September. Then I have the 2008 and the 2007. Keep in mind, 2008 and 2007 are audited numbers. Okay, so there's no projections in those years. And again, these numbers remove the effect of transfers, reserves by appropriation, and capital expenditures. Again, I'm trying to get back to an operating budget. We combine a capital budget with an operating budget here at the Cherokee Nation. We don't have two distinct budgets. And we've been kind of working toward that in that goal for several years. But as long as we're continually combining our capital and our operating budgets, I think it's important that we isolate the operating by itself, especially as it pertains to discretionary funding sources. Because those are the only funding sources that you have the discretion to reappropriate or redesignate. But the highlighted ones are the ones that are funding off carryover. I have another report, if anyone wants it, I can give it to you at break, that is just the carryover budgets and the amount for the last 3 years that they have budgeted from carryover per budget.
Okay, would you supply that to all of us, please?
Commissioner, do you want to do that?
Councilor Watts, you had a question?
Thank you. I guess you kind of speak to this, but you can't broadly just decrease all the budgets because some of them are federal specific programs, right? So we would
Correct.
be just giving up and returning federal dollars to be reducing them just because other folks are facing reductions because of loss in revenue.
No. There would be no incentive to reduce a federal or state-funded program. You can't reprogram it for any other purpose. The grant's very
So
specific.
again,
Point
no,
of
you cannot
clarification.
broadly decrease.
Okay.
Point of clarification.
Because it would
Yes.
impact
Point of
state or federal
clarification.
Excuse me, Councilor Watts.
Right.
Point of clarification.
When I made that statement previously, it was just on our tribal funded dollars, had nothing to do with federal funding.
Excuse me. Continue, Councilor Watts.
I'm done, thank you.
Okay. Councilor Fisher.
Well, this is going to kind of address that too, along what Tina said, but Doug, I realize that you can't take federal dollars and reduce it because it's silly to give them back. But I'm noticing a trend here in these reports because there's one or two things I actually asked you for myself. When we've got budgets that are spending federal dollars before tribal dollars, tribal dollars before federal dollars, can we not peel away some of the tribal dollars back and tell them to use their federal dollars? Because that runs contrary to what we were supposed to do in policy.
Well, any tribal dollars, you can do anything you want to do as a group with. Okay.
And-
The tribal dollars are discretionary. Meaning it's our discretion, your discretion, the Cherokee Nation. With that comes a federal grant category, non-discretionary, absolute. Okay. Tribal discretionary, 100% discretionary. Okay? You determine, or we, the Cherokee Nation determines what the use is going to be. In the middle is another group, kind of semi-discretionary. The compacts are a good example of that. IHS compacts. Now, the nation can determine how many nurses are needed at Stillwell, or how many dentists are needed at Muskogee. Or you see my point? But you can't take IHS compact dollars and put them in some tribal bridge program. So they're kind of a semi-discretionary group.
Yeah, that's the point I'm
Yeah,
trying
and
to
to finish answering your question, yes, there are very few this time. I can tell you that. Last year there were several. This year there are some. I point them out in my group review, my department reviews, where I'm finding the appearance of tribal dollars being expended with a federal carryover consistently occurring. That kind of makes you go, wonder why we're doing that. Maybe we need more information to understand why that's happening. There are a few of those pointed out as we go through the groups.
That's what I want to make sure we
Councilor
had
Watts?
a handle.
Oh, excuse me.
I want to make sure we had a handle on what I was going to tell you. Thank you.
Surely. Councilor Watts.
Well, and I appreciate hearing those comments because I think that lends itself back to some discussions that have been had in other committee meetings throughout the past couple of years for this body needs to have more self-control and not use tribal funds to make it easier on staff or even our constituents, for example, in housing or rehab, because we didn't want to comply with federal requirement for EPA guidance on lead-based abatement and some of these other things, we sidestep that process, which does take longer for federal guideline requirements, and use tribal funds first. And so I think if that's the case, we need to have more self-control and remember that as a good practice throughout the year when we start modifying and monkeying with budgets. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Continue that.
Okay. We'll go ahead and go through some of this. Some of the key points of interest, as I've already mentioned. Here's one. Callie's already addressed this, so I'm not going to spend much time with it. The dividend number being $4.2 million to the heavy end on what needed to be adjusted. She's already addressed that and provided you with the administration's proposal of how to address that. Second point are the vacant positions. Already gone over that. Several programs are consistently budgeting minor increases over the previous budget level and are equally consistent in spending much less than their budget. When tribal discretionary funds are consistently appropriated, yet remain unspent at the end of the year, the tribal dollars never get utilized. The trend can result in consistently increasing carryover balance, which is what we have experienced over the past several years. Now, Callie has indicated to you that she's expecting that trend to stop with the 09 audit. So she's expecting the discretionary or the general fund carryover to actually go down with the 09 audit. Not necessarily a bad thing, because a significant amount of that carryover was appropriated for one-time capital expenditures. $6.5 million, just off the top of my head, was for that capital improvement project that the administration is working on currently. As we progress through the group's review and departmental comment sections of the report, several comments on the group trends have been provided. The budget requests a total use of funds of $533 million. Estimated $30 million. Estimated 30. The report could stretch far beyond the 2010 fiscal year. Now that $30 million is extremely conservative. It'll be a significant amount more than $30 million. Will stretch far beyond 2010. Now, I'm talking about nation as a whole. I'm not just talking about general fund now. The Cherokee Nation budget. Interfund transfers of $23 million. Capital acquisitions of $26 million. Reserves of another $12 million are all included in the budget. Taking the items into consideration, we have an actual tribal government expenditure budget for all programs and government services and resources of approximately $440 million. As she indicated, we only have one new request being proposed by the administration. Callie's already mentioned that gifted student pilot project for $25,000. As compared to 09, we had 13 initiatives at $2.2 million, and in 2008 we had 26 new initiatives for a little over $11.5 million. Let's look at the total revenues for the past 5 years. These are budgeted revenues. Okay. 2006, you can see the trend. We bumped up a little bit in 07. Came along fairly consistent in 08. You can see the effect of Hastings hitting 09, and we're staying very flat on current year revenues in 2010, as already indicated by the treasurer. You see the carryover decrease is considerable. Okay, so the $122 million dropped down to $82 million. That's a $40 million decrease in projected carryover in 1 year. But $16 million of that 40 is directly related to capital projects, spending down those construction projects. $13 million is Gen Fund, reduction on the Gen Fund carryover, and motor vehicle tax is another 3. So those are some of the larger impacts on that decrease. Just as a note, the carryover across the years as a percentage of the total is ranging anywhere from 16 to 28%, with 28% being 2008, the last audited year. Now the budgeted expenditures, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councilor Sutton.
All right, Chair. Can you go back to that slide real quick?
Sure.
Have you ever seen that before in your history? That trend right there? I mean, I know that it's you know, the carryover's pretty much growing or staying the same, but have you seen that before? A drop that much?
A drop.
What do you mean?
That's pretty consistent. And the reason it is because consistently the proposed budget year, the year that we're appropriating at this point, will not have all that carryover we know exists out there, but we can't quantify what it is.
It's out there, but I'm just curious, because that, if that's happened in previous years to that quantity, I just was curious if that's something does that alarm anybody, or not really?
Where it would raise an eyebrow to an alarm with me would be when we have time-specific grants, and we can't foresee getting those dollars obligated within the congressional window.
Okay.
I don't see much concern of that. There's a couple of programs back here that we'll talk about and that I'll show you have a very consistent high level of carryover. Fortunately, those are annual fundings, and they're not like a 2 or 3 year grant that all of a sudden ends. Okay. The expense side, I went ahead and put the percentages on here so you could see what level of expenditure we have. The blue is the projected actuals. Again, that's through July. This chart, again, I've excluded any transfers, CapEx, and reserves. Now we're not talking about just general fund. This is the entire Cherokee Nation with all 30-something funding sources, 25 groups, 80-something departments, and I don't know, 400-something budgets. This is everything here. You want to focus in on some of these. I have the background information that can explain some of these large unused numbers at the top of these bar graphs. For instance, the 2007 $101 million. 54 million of that is in contract services. That's what remained unspent. So with that statement, let me just expand on that a little bit. That's sticking out as a trend, obviously. We have a consistent trend of anywhere from 20 to 27% underutilization of all appropriated budget. There's a lot of information behind that we have to understand and consider. The capital expenditure components of it, which are one-time expenditures that can stretch, we could bring in budget, revenues, bond issuances, the proceeds of that bond issuance, and take 2 years to build it. We may have it all appropriated in 1 year, knowing good well we're not going to get this thing built within 1 year. Okay? We may have contract services for things that we set aside for specific purposes, like contingencies, or not contingencies, but litigation reasons, or some. Just went blank. Anyway, we keep moving on. Just lost my train of thought. Anyway, 20. Okay, I know where I was going now. Sorry. Each group between 2006 and 2009, specifically the 6, 7, and 8, that are consistently $85 to $105 million, or right around that 75% mark. There's over 20-something million dollars right there of roads alone. Okay, just the IRR roads, which we put it all on everyone knows we put it all on the table, and then we spend as much as we can on the road projects, but it's all in there. So it's that's a big component of that. The $178 million, $114 million of that is in contracts. $62 million is community services, which largely is roads. Okay, It includes normal IR road funding. It includes all the economic stimulus road funding. And I want to point this out too, any economic stimulus funds that have come in the last 6 months have been appropriated by this body are going to be, most of that's going to be sitting in the 178 because up to this point we haven't expended very much at all. But yet we've got several, but I don't even know how many economic, 30 and 40 million? I don't know. What's the total?
It's over 40.
40 to 50 million. So, I just want to point that out. One other thing on the 178 projection, 20 million of that, however, though, is salaries and benefits. And we'll get into that in another chart later. You can see that we're trending, if you look at it, we're trending to expend around 350 million in 2010. One of the larger impacts that can affect this chart is the ability for the health group to fill all those hundreds of vacant positions. I mean, that would have more impact on this chart than anything else, that and the roads. Let me move on here. Any questions on this before I go on? Okay. The dividend income. Here's the history. We've already addressed the blue part there. It's going to be adjusted down.
Okay, that was my question, because we've already talked about it. Okay, let's make it. Thank you.
Yeah, that blue will be down around the, a little below the yellow, not much.
Councilor Jordan.
Now, how much is our dividend right now?
34.2.
34.2%? No,
Oh,
the
30.
percentage. 30. And when was the last time that it was raised? Does anybody, Todd, would you know that?
05?
And we have not considered raising that dividend since then?
There has been questions about raising the dividend. The objection usually comes in the form is that would violate covenants with banks that we have lines of credit with, and that's usually the response that I've received from, or that the council has received from CNE when any talk of an increased dividend is.
Has anybody asked that we be provided with those by tomorrow? Those banking agreements that says we can't go above a certain amount on our dividends? I would make that in the form of a motion that we have. Oh, well, I don't think we need to. I would just ask that it be provided, that information be provided to us tomorrow.
Okay, because we have had it provided in the past, but we can request them, see if they can get it to us by tomorrow. Yes. Councilor Hoskins.
Just to briefly comment on that, I pressed on that issue probably in 07, and initially the representation was that these agreements contain terms which strictly limited. As it turned out, that's not true. What it says is it speaks in terms of, it speaks in more general terms, and it's talking about dividends. So there is nothing that I've seen in those agreements which puts some sort of a ceiling on the dividend, notwithstanding how it's been sold to the council. So I think that those documents will bear that out, and I hope they do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would it be possible for the chair to request that those documents be brought to us so we can look at those tomorrow? And would that be a request made to Callie?
We may have the loan covenants behind the resolution that approved, or the Job Growth Act.
Right, which I believe we...
I mean, the resolution that was approved to enter into the pledging of credit, I believe is the one in the back that actually has the covenants to the loan agreement behind it.
We should have those in-house.
Yeah, I'll get that for you after the meeting.
Okay.
More on this. Okay, indirect cost pool. And this is business world version of overhead, so to speak. this is a good example of the we have an indirect cost pool that has consistently decreased the indirect cost rate, even though the pool has significantly increased its budgets. Two things can occur here to drive that percent rate down. Okay, one is the base increases that you apply the pool's expenses to, which has occurred, especially with assumption of Hastings. As that pool of budget, or as that base of budgets grow, that we can charge these support functions to that aren't easily allocated to those programs, then as long as our indirect cost pool budgets, all of the budgets that are in the pool itself, don't grow at a faster click than the base, you know, who's getting charged the overhead or the IDC, then the rate will typically go down. Another thing that can affect this rate decrease is when the pool's budgets actually come in under budget, even if the base doesn't move at all. But the actual expenditures within the indirect cost pool are below budget. Now, in 2009, Cali changed the methodology of indirect cost budgeting on the IDC recovery, the funding coming into the pool to offset all these expenses. We used to just budget a break even and compare it to what the other programs were budgeting to pay in. But in last year, she changed that methodology to actually budget the recovery at what the programs were in fact budgeting an indirect cost expense. An expense to the programs is a source of funds to the pool. Now, I would caution here on this chart, we are extremely close. On $32 million, we're less than $1 million of budgeting more than what the programs are paying in. We know the programs don't expend 96% of their budget, which all of their subject to expenses, all their expenses that are subject to indirect cost allocation of 15-point-something%, they would have to expend that same percentage of their budget to provide the funding to offset that level of expense. But again, looking at the trend and the history of the nation, we typically underspend the indirect cost pool budget. Again, I'll make the same comment I made last year. This is a pool that, because of the change in the budgeting methodology, we have to monitor this. Not that we didn't monitor in the past. We have to really watch this because now it becomes an availability of funding issue. The IDC pool is a budget, just like any other budget, subject to the availability of funds. And if the programs don't provide indirect cost recovery, even though this is a 2-year a pool that gets the rate gets adjusted 2 years later, there's no provision in the Constitution that says that an indirect cost pool is accepted from that availability of revenue clause. So with that, historically we've done a good job managing the indirect cost pool. It can be somewhat of a kind of a confusing topic to talk about and present when you start talking about surplus, shortfalls, and over recoveries and the difference in those. But you know, I think we're okay with this. I don't see any reason why the indirect cost pool budget. The only thing that sticks out is the consistent trend of growth. We're clicking up pretty good pace here. We've got some significant budget increases in this 2010 budget when it comes to some of the support functions, primarily in the health department. We're requesting an IS funding out of here, as well as the Cherokee Nation IS department is requesting a significant increase in indirect cost funding. And I'll talk more about those as we go into the groups. Next chart, here's the salaries by function. You've seen this chart before where I try to break out the governments and boards, service divisions, and the resource divisions. And you can see that every year we're 90%, I guess, high 80% into the service groups when it comes to actually appropriating the money for the salaries and the employment levels. And you see a significant increase from '08 to '09. That Hastings is largely driving that. And when it comes to the actual head counts within these groups, it's the same trend, but you'll see the more impact of the actual head counts in '09. Now the nation as a whole, here's the salaries and benefits for the Cherokee Nation as compared over a 5-year period in what was budgeted and what was actually expended, or what left remain unexpended, which would be your blocks at the top. And the majority of the 14 and the 20 million that remained unexpended in '08 and '09, the vast majority of that is largely driven by the Hastings assumption and its impact into the appropriation bill. The 24 that's in 2010, health is 14 of that when it comes to vacant and new. So again, we're looking at over 60% of this unexpended chart being attributable to the health group, which wouldn't surprise me because the health group has 40% of the total budget for the entire nation. Here's the staffing levels that coincide with that. 114 new positions, 67 are in health. We have 10 in education, 9 in career services, some of the major service groups. The 412 vacant positions, 165 are in health. Human services is holding 63 positions vacant. Education has 37 of them. And community service, 25. So you can see that the vast majority of these vacant positions are all holding on the service groups. Here's a quick pie chart for those vacancies. The 412. You can see where it's spread out across all the groups. Human services, health, education, community services, making up probably 85+% of the total. 114 new positions. Now when we say new positions, we're talking about positions that are categorized by the budget preparers as brand new to this budget process. They weren't included in last year's budget.
Yes, Councilor Jordan.
Did I miss, or did you tell us how many of those positions that are vacant are tribally funded dollar positions?
I didn't say that, but I have that information.
Can you tell us what that is?
Give me just a minute. The pivot table that's behind your charts that start on page 5 is total all funding sources. Okay? Now I have that exact same pivot table that shows the vacants and the news just for discretionaries and just for the general fund. I didn't put them in here because the binder was getting too thick. But these exact same reports that break it down either by group or department or all the way down to the accounting unit, I have these reports as well. I don't have copies, but for Gen Fund only and for the discretionary sources only, which would also include your compacts and IDC and motor fuels.
Can you look on Gen Fund and just tell me how many tribally funded dollars are being used, set aside for the vacant positions that we anticipate for the next year or that we've got vacant now?
The vacants, the 59, they have 59 vacant positions, $2.5 million.
And that's tribal funded dollars?
That's just tribal funds, just gen fund.
Okay, so if...
And the new positions,
Yeah, new also.
there's only 10 of those. There's only 10 new positions,
And how much is that?
439,000.
Okay, and those are tribal funded dollars?
Yes.
So if we were to impose a freeze on tribal funded positions being filled, we would have $3 more million.
Theoretically, yes, but in reality, no, because we don't know how many of these, the vacant, not the news. Now, the news shouldn't
We
be
don't know
filled.
how many of the
They're new for
vacants
next year. But the
have
vacants, we
been
don't
filled.
know how many of those vacants, how many of those 59 have been filled since the middle of May.
And could Callie find that out for us by tomorrow?
I can try.
Okay, thank you.
It's going to take some comparison work, but we'll start working on it.
Thank you.
I don't have copies of this, but I mean, I can get you copies of this information, anybody that wants it. Let's see, do we finish the, okay, moving on. Motor fuel tax budget. As Callie indicated, fuel tax revenues remaining relatively flat. It's also remaining fairly consistent between the groups. So utilization of our fuel tax compact is not moving. It's very consistent. And if I were to expand this thing out for 4 or 5 years of motor fuels, we would still see very similar trends here as far as the allocation of those fuel tax dollars. Okay. Now, in the book, the report starts on a page number 1 in tabular data. And I want to go over a few of these that's in this overview. I'm not going to go into all these pages of pivot tables, but there are a few that I want to point out. On that first page, number 1, the top part that's in the bold print, as indicated in the asterisk, there are 3 more tabs in this book. These are the discretionary or semi-discretionary funding sources. Okay? These are the ones that you have discretion to actually, I guess, act upon. Those 7 items there, tribally funded, motor fuels tax, indirect cost pool, motor vehicle tax, and the DOI and IHS compacts. If you look in your book, the next tab says discretionary dollars by level 1 division. I'm only taking, as you'll notice, the first one behind that tab is tribally funded, okay? And it's by group, so that's a level 1 report. It's by group. The next page is the motor fuels and goes right down the line, okay? So it shows you which groups are utilizing, and it shows you a 3-year trend. Now the next tab in the book is the level 2 report. So it's the exact same report as the level 1, except I break it out into departments within the group. In essence, it enables you to go drill down through the numbers by just knowing how I've compiled my report. And then level 3, the next tab, is the lowest level, and that's the accounting unit within the departments, within the groups. And the accounting unit kind of resembles the purpose for which the appropriation, without getting any lower than that into line items. Now, back to page 1 in that first section. I just want to briefly comment on those next 3 tabs because I'm not going to go into those 3 tabs. I just want everyone to become aware that as a discretionary funding source, you can go and view these tabs to drill down through at whatever level you want to see utilization of discretionary revenues. The very first line in that number, page 1, tribally funded, shows a $77 million 2010 budget. 89.7, almost 90 million in this year's budget. That's a decrease of $13 million. That in itself, as compared to what could be a $6-7 million expenditure in excess of revenues for this year, that in itself would avail approximately $5 to $6 more million later. Okay, I mean, just as a high level look at it. But, it's 11 million more though than the actuals that we expended in 2008, which is good, because even though we're being conservative, Callie's being very conservative in her revenue estimate of carryover into the general fund from prior year revenues. Even what she's putting on the table is 17% more than what we expended in 2008. Now I say that's good. I say it's good in the sense that available revenues to appropriate for services continue to go up. One could take the opposite approach. Well, why didn't we spend what we budgeted in 2008? Well, 2008's budget is not at the level the 2010 budget is. So you can't decipher you can't draw a conclusion on the surface of these numbers. I guess is the point I want to make. It's still, if we were seeing a budgeted revenue decrease from last year and a decrease from what we spent in 2008, we definitely are appropriating less than we spent in our last closed books, and that would, obviously raise some concern and attention, and really require a tightening of the belt. One other thing that sticks out on the third row, indirect cost pool, you'll notice that over on the far right, we've got a 50% increase in the indirect cost pool's budget as compared to what we just spent in 2008. $10 million this budget has in it, in excess of what we just spent. $5 million of that is in the IS department. We'll go into some of that a little more. But that, I mean, you see what I'm saying? That alone, if the base is continuing to grow, even though the IDC pool has doubled from what we spent in 2008, can cause a rate reduction. Now, if we spend all the budget and it's clicking upwards at a faster pace than that base is, we're going to see IDC rate increases. And we could see under recoveries at the same time. Typically, an under recovery will drive a rate increase. We're not anticipating an under recovery at this point. IHS self-governance health, you see the obvious number there over the 2008 actuals. This budget is $170 million, almost exactly what is in the 2009 budget. Matter of fact, it shows a 0% change budget to budget year to year. However, it's 124% more than what we spent in 2008, $94 million. Those are just some big points of interest. Going down the report, you'll see some very significant numbers here. IHS self-governance roads is showing $35 million on the right column, budgeted in excess of what was spent in 2008. Big economic stimulus impact here on this line, as well as if you look on the HUD line, we have some impact there from economic stimulus driving those large variances. The next page 2, this is just a kind of an accountant's dream, but I don't know, it might be everyone else's nightmare. It's a very detailed report. 3-year history, budget versus actuals. Doesn't have anything to do with groups, departments, or budgets. It's strictly total, all of our revenue types that come in the door, what we spend our money for, not who spends it, but what it goes out for. And then at the bottom, the reconciliation is where's all the money come from, the funding sources. There's a wealth of information on this one page, but it sure does have a lot of numbers on it. Page 3 is a staffing report. These numbers have already been reflected in those charts I showed you that had the government, the resources, and the support functions. Showing a $9.2 million increase in salaries and benefits for next year compared to this year's budget, with almost $8 million of that being on services. So 90% of the increase is in service units. Now, page 4 is a table that shows you by group where the existing, the vacants, and the new positions are. And you'll notice in the header of this report is for all funding sources, irregardless of where the funds come from. The MOA and IPA, 390 of them, are not in this table. Those are contract services. Okay. So as those possibly transition over to tribal hires, we will continue to see a Hastings impact to the employment numbers. Oh, that's all right. The next report behind there, page 5, takes the exact same report and again drills it down into departments. So you can actually see the departments within each group. Like the first group's Office of the Chief, and here there are his 6 departments that roll up under his group, and the total line is what goes on that previous page. But this gives you the numbers and the salary and benefits for the department. So you can see how that drill down works. And then, the level below this, where you actually get into the accounting units, are behind each tab, each group's tab specific. I didn't want to put it in here twice. The binder was getting too thick. So if you want to see the actual vacancies or position counts or new hires on a specific budget, you can see that in the groups, behind the groups tab. Any questions? Mr. Chairman, that concludes my general overview.
Thank you. Yes, Councilor.
Just a real quick question before I forget. This may be from Melanie. And I can't remember where I saw it now without pulling back out, but I noticed that the hymnal and radio show zeroed out. Is that some combining of radio show or something?
Yes. We had a separate budget for the hymnal, which went back several years, and that's just all rolled into one budget now.
That's what I'm assuming. Thank you.
Okay. Then I would entertain a motion that we approve the budget with the amendments that Callie presented, reducing the revenue.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. And as Doug goes through each of the different divisions, then we can make adjustments as necessary. Unless someone wants to
Just a point of clarification. As he moves through, would we be able to subsequently go back to earlier parts and make adjustments as we go through?
Yes. So, yes.
I make a motion, since it's almost 4, that we start the part with Doug tomorrow on going into the specific departments.
Second.
So are you making a motion to recess until 9 tomorrow?
Yes. Well, if 9's okay with everybody, I'm not.
Well, that's our scheduled time.
Okay.
Okay. The motion's been made and seconded that we recess until 9 tomorrow morning. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. 2 opposed. The ayes have it. We will see you tomorrow morning at 9.
That's all right.
And
I just had a question regarding how, and maybe this is just you and I and Doug putting our heads together. I have told the group leaders for each group to be available, and I just kind of need to know what org.